Good morning. Hmm. One minute. Okay, good morning. Continuing the review of my essay, which I have now concluded, just concluded yesterday. The essay which sums up Hemshech Ayin Beis and attempts to explain what the Rebbe Rashab would have most likely written based on the Rebbe Rashab's own hints and indicators, as well as the discourses that I'm referring to, namely Maimer Hamagbihi Shevis from the Alter Rebbe and from the Mitteler Rebbe. And yesterday we finished reading that section from the discourse that answers the question, or I should say, it continues the explanation that once we are aware and cognizant of the divine unity that the Nefesh Elokis contemplates on in Shema, Hashem Echad, that in turn impacts the animal soul, which is bound together as a body and a soul are together, the divine soul and animal soul are together, as we learned, and introduces into the animal soul these higher transcendent concepts to the point that it actually affects the animal soul to be stimulated and aroused with a love to God, a love to the transcendent. As we read this inside, and we are up to page 5. Let me just pull it up here. Yeah. We're actually still in the middle of the Mitteler Rebbe's discourse. So we're on page 6, I should say, I believe. Let me just see. Let me look at this more wider. Yeah. We're actually, yeah, we're at top of page 6 in this essay. So what did we learn? As I said, we learned how the animal soul is affected by this higher state of consciousness. To the point, as he said, that the animal soul is elevated to its source in the Sheir, in the animal within the chariot, the Markava in Yetzirah, or even Bria, he mentions Yetzirah, and said even more so into Atzilus, into Shem Ma'am Ban, which is Adam Ubehemus Yeshia Hashem in Atzilus. And the key points to keep in mind is number one, because the Nefesh Elokis is mislabish, manifests within the Nefesh Abamis, so it engages with it on its terms. So every idea that Nefesh Elokis understands is also being understood by the animal soul to some extent. Secondly, the Nefesh Elokis is introducing a divine consciousness that the animal soul would not have known on its own. And that is the idea of generally godliness, but especially the godliness that's beyond existence, higher than Ishtalshalos, and that it does not get nishtana, no shinui. In other words, you have the preserved integrity of Elokus in its purest form, as it is in Das Elyon, so too after in Ishtalshalos. That's also part of this contemplation of Shema Yisrael. So that also impacts the animal soul to the point that we reach the level, he said, even of Das Elyon and Das Tachten together, loy niskanu alilus with a vav and loy with an aleph. So both that he's within and beyond existence. And that's where we stopped. And so on top of page 6, V'zeu Shema Yisrael Dafka, we read that, I believe, the last few lines, the top lines on page 6, that this is Shema Yisrael. Let me just see. I want to make sure.
I don't think we did. The last word we left off on Zehu, last word on the bottom of page 5.
What was the last word? V'zehu?
Yes.
Okay, so now maybe because I added some words, v'zehu moved to page 6.
Oh, I see.
Yesterday was the bottom of 5. Okay, it's fine. Good. We'll start from there, top of page 6. I did some corrections. I went through it again to see if there are any typos. So there are some, should be some changes, maybe, as I said, a word here, spelled out things. Okay. So let's continue up top of page 6. V'zeu Shema Yisrael dafka. And this is Shema Yisrael dafka. Yisrael. Because it says Shema Yisrael. Yisrael, he says, V'zeu ha-nefesh al-kis. It's referring to the divine soul. Sheshorsha b'pnimius v'atzmus elikus, v'atzmis elikus. For the record, the text you can find at the group, in Ayin Beis, the group. We didn't post it yet on ayinbeis.com. We will soon. This is on the group. So, and the nefesh which rooted in the inner and core of elikus, like it says, Kameshakosar K'ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, Ner Havaya, Nishmas Adam, Shagam, and here's the Pa'ula. This contemplation of Shema Yisrael that we just discussed about the divine unity on all levels, Shazeh Poil, Shagam B'nefesh Habamis, Shagam B'nefesh Habamis, that also the animal soul, Teir Eira L'Kiyah Yidei Shem Havaya Shabbat. So the Shem Havaya of Yisrael, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, that the Hashem should radiate in Elokeinu, Eira L'Kiyah Yidei Shem Havaya Shabbat, Shezeu Shekosav Havaya Elokeinu, Dafke Kanal. So it's not just Havaya remains on the Havaya level, it also goes into Elokeinu, which he doesn't say explicitly, but it sounds like the Elokeinu part is the Nefesh Habamis. Even though you could interpret Havaya goes on Nefesh Havaya, I don't think so. I think Sheter Sham Eirel Kiyah De Shem Havaya Shabbat, Shem Havaya within the Nefesh Elikis radiates into the Elokeinu of the Nefesh Habamis, and that's why we say Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Hashem Elokeinu. So it's integrating this level of unity that also the animal soul should be radiated and should be affected by it. And now he adds in parentheses, like will be in the future. So today we're still doing the work and still not fully finished. But in the future, canal that will receive from the core of Elikus without any interface at all. Let me see what he means by that. Does he mean no interface like the Malachim or of the like Riyah, or does he mean even through the neshama because the body itself will radiate with Elikus? Let's see what he says here. Yeah, clearly. That for this reason, that Lavi, that's why the bodies will receive like the souls do. Today, a body receives its light from the neshama. But as we learned, the bodies will receive directly from the source, like the Koyach Hariyah. They will not need to go through any mamutza, to the point they will actually even nourish the soul. I don't think he's mentioning that here. We'll see. But here he's just saying, and the bodies will live forever. Today they don't, because they have their limitations. But they will be so filled, so saturated, so filled with godliness that they too will directly draw from godliness. Now, this, of course, needs to be explained. Is he talking about the Nefesh Habamis? But because he's clearly talking about the Nefesh Habamis, and if you remember, the Ayin Beis does connect these two. However, if you remember, I pointed out this is more the level of Ein Oid, that the Kelim themselves, the darkness itself will radiate. But the Mitteler Rebbe is definitely conflating the two. But if you break it down, it is different levels. Because there's a level where the Nefesh Habamis is still receiving from Nefesh Elikis. The Asid Love, he's saying now, reaches even a higher level. But let's finish and then we'll see how it all fits in. The Gamba Umas Ha'elam. And here again he brings Umas Ha'elam. Remember, he brought that yesterday. We learned it in the previous page. He talked about Umas Ha'elam as a proof that Elikad Elikaya, that even when they serve their deities, they still recognize God that permeates even into them. Let me just see where that was. Yeah. It's the previous section that we learned. Just want to see something there. Hold on a minute. Yeah, the Ra'ilazeh, the previous paragraph. Okay, so now he's continuing with that. The Gam Umisa Elam, he says, the Gam Umisa Elam, and also nations of the world, Omar Sheyapich Hashem al Amim Sofa Brura, that God will transform the nations. They should all speak a clear language, the language of God. So we see the effect is not just on a Jewish nefesh habamis, meaning in a Jew, but even on Umas Elam is the effect. So being that that's the ultimate purpose, that there'll be a transformation even of the forces that today conceal the divine and don't necessarily serve Hashem. So that's why even today when we say Vahafta, we say B'chol Levavcha afilu b'yetzer hara. It's not just something for the future, because we could achieve it. We can't achieve it perhaps to the fullest extent as we can la'osalave, but that's something that's achievable. But ayelazeh, and now he brings a proof to this, because you could argue maybe that's for the future. Today we can only do the avodah of the nefesh alikis and nefesh habamis. At best, you can just restrain it. Who says you can transform it? That it should actually love God. So he brings a raya, similar to the raya that he brings in Tanya, even though there he's talking more about the Ava Mesuteres, that everyone has love. So he says the raya for this is Mesidus Nefesh Beguf, that we see that Jews, or Moisa Nefesh Beguf, they're ready to give their lives, their physical bodies, not just dedication of their soul. Sha'al zeh, afilu neitlas nafshecha. Like when we say b'chol nafshecha, we say even if they take your soul, your life. Sheyesh koyach zeh b'chol nitzitz kot miyisrael ki yadua. This power of Mesidus Nefesh is a koyach in every small spark of your soul. Nitzitz kot most likely means like yechida, like from the language of Eitz Chaim, that everyone has that. V'zeu al Mesidus Nefesh al Torah mitzvahs. Dafke, shalamayla Mesidus Nefesh ba'ava rabba. This Mesidus Nefesh on Torah mitzvahs is higher than Mesidus Nefesh that just comes from loving God, because it's actually through doing Torah mitzvahs. Afila begufa of ka'avis. In other words, we said this earlier as well, and I think in Ayin Beis, I don't remember, but not in Mitteler Rebbe's mind for sure, that even the goof of the Ovis, where they had Ava Rabba, but they didn't have Torah mitzvahs from Matan Torah, so as high as they were, there was still something they were missing. So Mesidus Nefesh on Torah mitzvahs, every neshama has that. Because it says by the Ovis that Shem Havaya was not revealed to them. But after Matan Torah, it was revealed to everyone. That's what he said, Havaya Lekenu, and we all say Shema Yisrael. So he's basically saying Shema Yisrael, like he started on the top of the page, that every Yisrael has this, has the ability to experience Havaya and bring that Havaya into Lekenu. Kanal Vidal Lemevi. So bottom line is that L'Asad Lave obviously will be the fullest sense of the experience. But today as well, we say B'chol Levavcha B'shnei Yitzarecha, excuse me, because every Yisrael has this power in their neshama to the extent that they're capable through their avodah to cause Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, Shem Echad, to bring it down into their beings, even into their bodies, and B'chol Levavcha fil the Yetzer Hara, and the proof is from the Mesidus Nefesh that every Yisrael has. Okay. So this is a continuation of the explanation. Again, in Ayin Beis, he stopped by the contemplation in Hashem Echad and all the levels of the Yichud, 3 levels in general. Mitteler Rebbe continues and says, with that we understand how the next phrase, "V'haftas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha," the impact that has on the animal soul, which again, the Rebbe Rashab began saying it 11 pages earlier, but he never gets back to it. And here he is getting back to it. So that's the main thing that we're focusing on right now. Okay. So there's one more paragraph from the Mitteler Rebbe, but let me stop if anybody has any questions. Okay. Continuing on. V'acher kol hanal, Mitteler Rebbe continues. And after all the above, Yuvon, Inyan hanal, now he's going to bring us back to another point that the Rebbe Rashab began but did not conclude. What are the three things? Well, one second, before we get to that, sorry, not the mitzvah. How does this apply now to the moshel of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the Ner? Remember, the Ner is the wick, is the divine soul. That we know. The Shemen is the Seichel, the intelligence of the animal soul. That we also know. And that in turn creates the Oir and Eish, Ha'ava, V'haftas Hashem Elokecha, B'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha, that becomes fuel, the oil being drawn into the wick, Nefesh Elikis, influencing the Nefesh Habamis, to do what? To love God. So it's fueling divine love, divine transcendence, as we've been learning. So now he's going to tie it all together. Now, we know this actually we knew from Ayin Beis, because he said it earlier in relatively detail on page 1361 and 62, 63, as well as in the beginning 1350. But just like he doesn't get back to the Nefesh Habamis, he also doesn't get back to Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, which most likely the Rebbe Rashab would have done as well, because just to tie up all the knots. So the Rebbe, Mitteler Rebbe, is going to now tie it back to the example of the Ner. That's what he's going to do here. So Achar kol na yuven inyan anal beikad inyan hadlokas haner b'shemen upsila. The thing that we discussed earlier, that the primary components in lighting a lamp, a candle, is b'shemen, with the oil and the wick. Shapsilahu anefesh alikis. The wick, as we learned, is the divine soul. Shu b'chinas mamutza machaber. That's the connecting interface. Umevi ha'aras eir aliki. It brings the fire and the flame, the divine fire and flame. Sheyeir b'nefesh habamis, that should radiate and into the animal soul, the keiches shalah, and the animal soul's faculties, including, of course, seichel kamoy hamoyach va'lev begashmis, mind and the heart, and of course all other faculties physically. The hainu masha kosav b'shnei yitzarecha. That's what it means. V'haftas Hashem Elokecha b'shnei yitzarecha, with both sides of the heart. So that is the effect of the psila on the shemen, that it should all become part of the oir eliki. Dehine mavur lamaila, because it was now explained earlier, the ikasi b'sadlokish shel ha'oir, that the primary cause for the burning flame, ein rak machmas kaloyin hashemen. It's not just due kaloyin hashemen dafke. It's not just due to the consumption or the absorption of the shemen, but mashahu nimshach v'nishav, by being drawn and again you can say absorbed in the wick. I'm just looking here. Yeah, the bracket. Bipsila, in the wick. The kola ba'ir, and it gets consumed in the light, because remember, the oil doesn't remain oil. As the oil is drawn into the wick, it becomes the flame, fuels the flame, and the wick and the oil gets depleted in time. The kol mashiyirba b'meshach zman kaloyin hashemen ba'ir, and the longer it extends this absorption or consumption of the oil in flame, kach yirba zman hadloka. So if you have a lot of oil, and good oil is going to take some time. It could take half hour, an hour, it could take a few hours even. because what's happening is the oil is fueling the flame. So commensurate to the amount of time that the oil is being absorbed, that's how long will be the time that it will burn. And when the oil finally gets depleted, meaning it's all been consumed, then the light will burn out. That's when it will end. It won't continue to illuminate. The flame will burn out. The gam. So it's all, if you look at the parentheses and the brackets, it looks like it's different manuscripts, but it reads smoothly, so it's not that important here to emphasize what's in a bracket, what's not. I'm just reading it the way it was printed. The gam betzlilas havokas ha'or. That's regarding the feeding of that very flame, and also the clarity. The oil, if the oil is with sediment and somewhat polluted, it's obviously going to affect that it won't burn properly. But the tzlilas havokas ha'er, that the clarity and the smoothness, if you wish, that the flame will burn is again commensurate and dependent on what kind of quality oil. If the oil is not very quality, it's going to flicker and it's going to be choppy and so on. Whereas if it's a very shemazaya zoch, pure olive oil and of high quality, so the Slilas Hashem will affect Slilas Havokas Ha'er. This was all discussed earlier, especially in the beginning of the Mitteler Rebbe's Maimer when he explained the mushal, the example. So obviously all this is relevant to the animal soul, because the animal soul is this oil, and the more you feed, the more the animal soul is transformed into fuel, the more it feeds the flame of the loving a God of the Nefesh Elikis. And the clearer it is based on how refined the process is, meaning how refined the contemplation is. He doesn't spell out in the Nimshal, but he just said that. I have to correct the way I worded it. I read it's not Marak Machbes Kalayin Hashemesh. You could read that two ways. I read it wrongly. I was saying it's not only due to the consumption. He says Ein Rak, he means to say it's dafka due. That the main burning of the candle is Ein Rak. He didn't mean not only, but there's some other factor. Ein Rak, it's only due to the amount of oil and the pace it's consumed and the quality of the oil. So what you see here, how important the oil is. If you only had a wick and you lit a wick, yes, you'd have a flame. How long would it burn? Seconds, minute maybe, depending how big the wick is, but it's what's going to burn out. So Nefesh Elikis, when it comes down below into the Nefesh Habamis, the Nefesh Habamis has the bulk fuel. However, the Nefesh Habamis has to be transformed, because on its own, it's going to use its intelligence for its own needs. And here, the Nefesh Elikis is harnessing it and drawing it to become part of the Ur Eliki of Ahavta Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha. So you're now going to continue in the Nimshal, in the moral, what this means. So these ideas shouldn't be new to any of us. These ideas shouldn't be, let me finish. These ideas should not be new to any of us because we learned it quite extensively in the beginning in page 1350 and then later again a few times. But it's still always good to refresh. So he's now going to go back to the Nimshal. What did you want to ask?
No, you said before, instead of rak, it should stay elo. Eino elo.
I know, he doesn't use the word ella. Maybe I have to look if it fell out, but that's what he means, yeah. Yeah.
Is only due to, can you take your question, or did you not mean to stop for questions?
Go ahead.
I'm trying to, obviously I've learned this several times, but new questions pop up. I'm wondering what it means for the soul to be in a body where the body doesn't recognize godliness at all. First, my mind went to like a coma. That's not terribly interesting. What's more interesting is like pick the atheist, for example. What's going on with the neshama there? Is it just completely? I mean, it's like it's a yid, an atheistic yid.
Didn't you literally ask this question a few days ago?
I don't know. It's possible. It's possible. But I mean, there's a Pintel
Let's say,
yet.
why an atheist? Why not you and I? I have a pretty powerful animal soul. I don't need to turn to an atheist. I mean, I'm not 24/7 aware of God in my life.
I recognize God at all times.
Well, I don't. When you're enthralled by your own selfish needs, I mean, when you make a mistake, a ruach shtus that causes a sin.
I basically can say I'm making a mistake. This is not the way I should be behaving.
So then I commend you. But we're constantly ignoring when a person is behaving in a way that hurtful to someone else, selfish, greedy. I mean, the whole nefesh habamis experience to me.
Well, okay, I can't say I'm that good. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
So we all have this struggle all the time. There's two nishvashis inside of us, and there's a battle. Sometimes you're very cognizant of your divine soul. Most of the time, not so. That's the battle. You're asking the process is because God put the soul inside of a body and yes, concealed. If there was no body or no Yetzer Hara, we'd be like in heaven. There'd be no other option. It'd only be Elokus. Like the Neshamas and Gan Eden. They don't have any. They don't have to eat or sleep or drink or they don't have any vices or anything like that. But the neshama comes into a body. We learned that later. That's what the tzimtzum is. Tzimtzum means the divine is concealed. It doesn't mean it's not accessible, but you need avodah to get there, which is what we're discussing. That's why you need Shema Yisrael to reintroduce or wake us up or make us aware that there's a God, Hashem Echad, and all these levels.
Let me tell you why I asked the question the way I did. Because we've said that without the shemen, the psila would burn out. With whatever. I have to repeat what you said. You said it. Wow. So the Indian there is for a yid who may wax and wane in and out of his or her acknowledgement of the Eibishter and engaging in things that are holy. Okay, so he's still doing it. The psila that is getting some fuel. It may be like watering a plant, maybe not a permanent constant trickle, but it's getting fueled. So for those times where your one is solely engaged in affairs of the nefesh Bahamas, gluttony, lust, God forbid, whatever. So still, the neshama has been fed shemen. It can endure even a period of sin.
Well, even that could be argued. That can be argued because just because a person's alive, it doesn't mean he's being fed shemen of kedusha.
That's why I picked the atheist, because he's not.
But to me, we're all in the same boat. To me, an atheist and you, and maybe not you, but me, I put myself exactly in the same boat because we're all in the same world with a tzimtzum and a concealment, and all have an animal soul. So, are you suggesting someone that you know that doesn't have any good deeds?
Not at all. Well, no.
Okay, so everybody has good deeds. If you're looking for good deeds, everybody has virtues. Even if they call themselves an atheist or call themselves you already one. Why don't you, instead of using atheist, maybe call someone who's behaves very selfishly and greedy all day? That would be to me more
apt.
So that's why you need Shema. If they're not saying Shema and they're not doing any harnessing, yeah, any one of us. I would say most people say Shema, they don't even think about the words. They just say lip service. So this is the Avodah. That's why we're supposed to daven and daven properly. That when you say the words properly and you contemplate, it's supposed to counter the concealment of the animal soul. And if you don't, you're going to be, you're not going to have love of God. You're going to have love of yourself and love of material world.
Well, that's for sure.
In that context, what's your question?
In that context, and maybe the mashal doesn't go that far, but the mashal is if the neshama is not fed by the goof at all, it's going to burn out. But not just the
burn out. The pilot flame remains.
Right.
It's just not active in your life.
Right. That's what I said. It just left with the Pintel Yid. That's all.
That's why you need avodah. That's why everybody needs work. It's like someone saying, "I'm a good person at heart, but I'm not acting on it." So yes, in your heart you have a spark, but acting on it is what makes it come alive in your life.
Very good. I understand. Thank you for going through that. Thank you.
And that's exactly what Shema is meant to do. I thought someone's going to ask, you don't see anyone happening to them after Shema. They suddenly become more loving and more divine. But let's not go there right now, right?
Oh,
But
we have
even
gone. Yeah. Go ahead, Rabbi Tacto.
even the so-called atheist and is not activating in nothing, the neshama with the full might is in him. It could not
Well, we're
be
talking here avoid of Shema Yisrael. We're not talking about whether a person has a neshama no matter what. That's not the discussion in this mimer at all. It's not even going there. He's talking about the avoid of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and a person is mizbeinen, contemplating the whole the pages upon pages, Yichud Tata, Yichud Ilah, the Yichud of both Yichudim, and that spills over into the animal soul. You want to discuss whether a neshama has a connection to God, even if it doesn't daven and doesn't say Shema? It's a whole other discussion. The answer is yes, it does, but that's not the kavanah. Everybody can have a connection, but the question is here, the avodah, making it real in your life. That's the whole discussion here, not whether people have it. That's a given. I mean, yes, he did bring a raya that even the guf, because a person would be moser nefesh, we just read. So that's a proof that every Shema Yisrael, that everyone has that ability. But the goal here is to actualize that ability.
right. But the point is to make the nefesh abahamis. That's the whole idea. How could the neshama make the nefesh abahamis to understand it?
That's
So
what we're
there's no
learning here.
agbalas. No agbalas. Every nefesh abahamis could come to that.
But it requires these bonus and this work, yeah?
Yes.
Correct. Okay, good. Good.
There is also one more thing that Alter Rebbe is saying. In addition to that, Moshe Rabbeinu is the one that is
He's not saying that here. This is not in this mimer here. That's a different mimer. That's not in this one. You're talking about what it says in Perik Mem Beis in Tanya or in Varai Mehemna, in Vata Tetzava, right?
in Teorel. Yeah.
Yeah, but that what you just bring it because it's on your mind, or because you saw it?
No, because he's talking there about there are two types of people, Zera Odom and Zera Behemoth.
Yeah, but there's hundreds of mimarim that talk about neshamas and so on. We're talking about a specific theme here.
Okay.
Okay, the kach benefesh alikis. So, like it is in the moshel with the nair of the shemen and the psila, the wick and the oil, so too in the nefesh alikis, nair havaya nishmas adam. So it's the nair of havaya, which is the soul of the person. Hainu kamoya psila. So what does that mean? Why is it called nair havaya? Because the nefesh alikis, the sham is like the wick. Shehu b'chinas keli la'oid hanechas ba. What is a wick? A wick is a keli. It's essentially a container that holds on to the oil that it grasps the flame. In other words, if you only had oil and flame, it also wouldn't work, like we learned earlier. Yes, you could light technically oil, but it's not going to be a flame as we know it as a candle. So the wick plays the role that it is the mamutza machaber, like he called it before, because it is where the flame is burning. The wick is drawing the oil. He explained this at length earlier, the Mitteler Rebbe did. So he says, so the nefesh neshama is the ner psel shubchins keilu er hanechas ba kacha neshama. So too the soul. B'chinas keli le'er eliki is a keli, a container to the divine light. K'meshakosov ki ato teir neri v'nikra ner havaya mamish ki ato teir neri. You illuminate my candle. Who's my candle? The neshama. So Hashem is illuminating, and mamish ner havaya nishmas adam mamish. Ach, zel b'chinas hachachmo bino midas the nefesh alikis. But that on its own is the mind, or the chachma and bina, and the emotions of the divine soul. B'ispaila shala ba'asogas alikus, in its excitement and in its stimulation, in divine comprehension. B'yichud ilah. Yichud Tata, both Yichud Elah and Yichud Tata. Kamei b'Pasuk Rishon the Krishma, Ba'omre Shema Yisrael, which is, of course, indicated in the first pasuk in Shema Yisrael, when he says Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. We learned earlier that's Yichud Ilah and Yichud Tata. V'zeu Kedimin HaPsila, and that's like similar, like the example of a wick. Shenase Keli Lahokil Eira Leki Ben Moichin Amidas the Nefesh Alekis, to contain the divine light in the moichin, in the intellect and the emotions of the divine soul. That's the psila. And the role it plays is only like an interface. Because like the wick itself doesn't really burn. On the other hand, without the wick, you don't have a flame holding on to. So the nefesh alekis in this context is serving like an interface between the fuel, the oil, and the flame. So it's like that it should bring that flame also into the faculties of the animal soul, which is the oil, being drawn into the wick and being turned into the flame. Shehin b'seichel midas shalah hanushim v'ativim. That means that the animal soul, in its seichel midas, which are different than the seichel midas of the wick, of the divine soul. It's human and natural intelligence and emotions that too should be so the Eir should be brought and permeate the oil of the animal soul. And that's what it causes, the koyach keloyin, that the absorption and the consumption, that the oil gets consumed and absorbed, meaning the animal soul gets consumed, absorbed, not by its own needs, but by the divine love of ahafta, of the flame of the oil. That's what the wick is doing. If the oil would resist the wick and would not cooperate, then you wouldn't have this. So the whole purpose of the nefesh, in this case, with the whole function here, is that the nefesh alekis, not that it itself is burning only, but that it's causing the oil to become a fuel for divine love. Kiloyin nefesh abamis, benefesh abamis, like affecting bitl in the nefesh abamis, bekeches shalah, in its faculties, bebitl hayesh, beyitl hayesh legasus. Maybe it shouldn't say legasus, bitl hayesh vigasus, maybe. To nullify the yesh. I don't think he means ligasus, because it's going from gasus, from crassness to refinement. I have to look up whether it's above vigasus, maybe that's the correct word. Bitla yesh, liyez b'bchinas ayin alekis, sho'er shemer b'nefesh alekis. In order to affect the animal soul, that it should become refined and move away from its yesh and crassness to the eir aleki, that radiates in the divine soul, like the inyan, like we mentioned before, that you love God with both sides of the heart. That the nefesh habamis should be consumed with a great love, v'tshuka, and yearning or longing, murgeshes, a palpable love and longing, b'tsemoyin, with thirst, yisoid ha'esha b'leiv basar, with a thirst that comes from the element of fire, the fiery love in the flesh, the like basically burning with love. Just as we can burn with love for physical things, we're burning with love for spirit, for godliness. That's the effect that the nefesh alekis is having on the nefesh habamis. And you see how the Mitteler Rebbe elaborates. This is his classic style. The Alter Rebbe says all this in a line or two, or a few lines. He's elaborating. Believe Bosso Dafke Canal. Zeu Kamoy Kiloyin Hashem and Shekola V'nichl Be'er de Psila. That's like the shemen being consumed and being absorbed and being encompassed and absorbed in the eir psila, in the fire in the wick of the wick, kishenimshach v'nisher bepsila. as is drawn and remains in the wick, because that's where the oil is being drawn to. If you look closely, the oil doesn't remain separate. The oil is being absorbed and drawn into the wick, and from there, the wick literally is turning oil into fire. That's what's happening. Now, you could ask, why does he need to elaborate? Seems like he's made it clear. Again, the Mitteler Rebbe will often go over an idea several times, different words, different ideas. That's his style. It's very different than many other the Rabbeim, but that's the Mitteler Rebbe style. And obviously, each line is precise, but he does have a classic style of elaborating, and sometimes I wouldn't call it redundant, but it's more of a constantly adding another point here, another point there, really talking it through. Let's put it that way. Okay. Let me stop here for any questions. If there are any questions.
What would happen if there will be no oil? The oil cannot nechaz b'psilo?
Why don't you try it out? Go now, after this class, take a wick and a flame and tell me what happens.
It's nechaz, but it's burned out right away. So it's the
So
shaman.
that's it. So you don't have a nair. If you want to light a nair of Shabbos, a nair Chanukah, a nair in the Beis Hamikdash, you can't be mekayim the mitzvah.
And fire cannot go directly with oil.
Try it out.
The psilo.
Try it. No. You could, because it has some alcohol, you could get it burning a little. Some people do like a trick. They put it into a plate oil, and you could light it, but it's not. First of all, it's not the mitzvah of a nair. Secondly, it's not really a flame as we understand a flame, which is, a beautiful nair that burns, whether it's nair Shabbos or nair Chan. Yeah.
And this is not like oil that you use.
Why don't you try it out? Why don't you just try it out? You'll see. Why is this so surprising to you?
No, I'm asking the difference between shaman and kerosene. Kerosene,
that's another discussion. Kerosene is just another form of fuel. The mitzvah is to use shaman, so we're talking shaman. But you could technically use a candle, paraffin, wax.
Your essay quotes the mimer correctly on that issue of legasos.
It's with a lamed.
Yes, in your text message, I showed you the original mimer.
Okay, I believe it. So I have to figure out. So he definitely doesn't mean you're turning it into gases. He means bitla yesh.
That's not a mistake. Your mistake. Vegasus.
He says no. He says that's how it's in the printed book. Now, for all we know, the printed book could also be a mistake. Anyway, the content is very clear. He's definitely not talking about turning it into gases. He's talking it the other way around. The opposite of ayin. Okay. Let me see it. Any other questions before I continue?
So the neshama is the psilo, not higher than the psilo.
Yeah, I mean, Rab Shleim, is this the first time you remember these ideas?
No, it's not. But mir darf es durchtun.
Fine. Omnom. Now he continues. He says like this: Omnom mavur lamaila. He's qualifying now something here. It was explained earlier above. The gam sibas hamshacha shel hashemen. That also the cause of what causes the oil to be drawn into the wick, mashanimsha v'nisha v'nichel v'psila, what is drawn and remains and gets absorbed in the wick, zehu bo aideha oil dafke shemeshachas hashemen. That itself, who's doing the work, is the wick that's drawing the oil. Kach gam, and what's in the nimshal, in the moral? What do we learn from that? So too, mashatichla nefesh habamis belev bosar. That when the nefesh habamis in its heart of flesh, where its natural love may be to its own interests, is now being drawn because it's affected by the nefesh halikis and its bonus, Shema, to v'haftas Hashem lekecha, limshach achar haneshama shebemoyach. and is being drawn to follow the neshama in the mind of the nefesh halikis. Zeu by the eir eliki. So just like the wick is the one that draws the oil, it's not that the oil on its own is traveling to the wick. This comes through the eir eliki shemeir al nefesh halikis. So the nefesh halikis, Ner Hashem, Nishmas Adam, has a divine light that is embedded within it. Sheyimshech Hashemen, that has the power to draw the oil. Shehu akeiches the nefesh habamis b'seichel and midas haba. To draw the faculties of the animal soul in its intellect and its midas. He's adding here simply one more point that he said earlier, that this very process is initiated by the nefesh halikis, not by the nefesh habamis, which seems obvious, but nevertheless, he's spelling it out in the example. In other words, if you didn't have a wick, the oil wouldn't start looking for a wick. The oil would just sit where it is, and that's it. You need something to be inserted in the oil, the wick, and then when you light the flame, the wick begins its job of drawing, like literally like a pipe, so to speak, that is drawing the oil into it. And Aveda means that the nefesh halikis is initiating it. I think the importance of this point is going to be made obvious a little later, because when the Alter Rebbe speaks about it, he speaks of koyach neshama atzma, that this is the power of the soul. I speak about it in the essay. We'll talk about this more. But right now, that's what he's emphasizing here. So now he's going to conclude, well, he's going to sum up. What do we take away from this? What do we take away from all of this? So he says like this. V'nimtza move on. So what do we derive? Just a second, let me see something here. So v'nimtza move mamoshel zeh. So what do we take away? What do we derive from this example? The psila v'shemen, that the wick and the oil, shekol mash nisraba hamshoches v'koloyin hashemen, like he said in the beginning, earlier he's repeating this, that the more and more increased, the more shemen you have, or I should rephrase, the more that the shemen is being absorbed and consumed, that directly affects how much oil is going to be created by this candle. Like he said earlier. And so is it in the spiritual level. The Eir Eliki, that the Eir Eliki, the divine light, that is created from the increased level of the absorbed faculties of the animal soul, anushi umidus hativim be'elakus lavis Hashem b'yetzer hara shebelev basar, that the more that an animal soul is feeding the love for God with its seichel anushi, with its human intellect, and midus tivim, and its natural midus, the more it's being drawn to godliness. Laves Hashem es Hashem, to love God b'yetzer hara, b'chol levavcha b'shnei tzarecha, with the yetzer hara, shebelev basar, with the heart of flesh, l'lida memenu, and to have and revere him or have reverence for him. Oy belev nishbar, or with a broken heart. First he said leiv basar, now he's saying a broken heart. He means a broken heart in a good way, that you feel that your material life, the materialism that an animal soul was working on, is insignificant. So leiv nishbar, that's all the effect, the limois, bechayev, that he should feel disgusted by materialism, by his material life. Ulavata v'lichlal kol taivas gufnim, and that he should eliminate and lichlal and absorb all his physical pleasures. Dafke through that process. The more that's done, so the more a person refines their animal soul, the more they're subduing it, the more they're refraining from allowing it to indulge in its desires. Dafka, that is what increases the flame and the light of the divine in the divine soul. But Tesrus Meruba Harbi Yeser, with an increased abundance, much more. Me'ikra Ares Er Shemer Ba Shehu Mistalik V'Kola. What I think he means is more than the light it has on its own, because what it's radiating in it is what's mistalik v'kola. What is mistalik v'kola means the fire that's expiring and being consumed. So bottom line is, what you're seeing here, this key point, is that the nefesh habam is dafke, that's increasing, like it is in a physical flame. The more oil you have, and the more the oil is refined and directed toward the flame, the greater the flame will be. So the divine flame is being fed directly by the animal soul's transformation. So the more you hold back from following a physical, material desire and impulse, that itself is turning the oil into the flame, which increases the light of the divine soul's love for God. And this is the advantage, the superior light that comes dafka from transforming darkness to light. Ki yadua hatam, as it's known, the reason for that, the root of the darkness below of the animal soul, in the animal soul, hu lamayla, it's higher than the root of the divine soul. So why? The animal soul is rooted in the world of toyu, shenikra behemoths v'chayis, that is called behemoths v'chayis, like cattle and animals, shekodmu lebchinas hatikun the adam, that precede the world of tikkun, of shema, of the adam, which is the nefesh alikis. Canal be'inyan adam behema, like we learned before, bama behemoths teshia, b'chinas ma ban, the b'chinas ban, the klipas nega, acher abir mishem ma, the nefesh alikis. Now, one's ban of klipas nega, after it's refined through the shema of the divine soul, the adam, it then elevates higher than the shema of the adam, l'mayla, above. And I think I'll stop here because the next piece is going to, well, I can continue, but I think I'm going to stop here. Let me just see. Yeah, let me stop here. Any questions? So here he's now emphasizing a point that was made earlier, but now not with so much emphasis. That what the Nefesh Habamis adds to the Nefesh Elikis. Not just that Nefesh Habamis is being harnessed and by directed and guided, but it's actually adding that key point that the more the oil, the bigger the greater the flame, the longer the flame, and the more sustainable it is. Okay, yeah, I would go on, but I don't want to rush it, so I'll just continue on Sunday. Any questions?
I have I'm sorry, Rabbi Title, do you want to ask?
So we're close to the bottom of page 6 in my essay.
No, this stop. You could go.
And we'll stop here. Yeah.
My question was, we understand the shaman is the Seichel Enoshi, the human intellect, and so does it follow that if big if, all capital letters, a very, very smart person devotes him or herself in let's say in Shema, recitation of Shema, and this contemplation that we're reading about, does that mean that if let's say a less intelligent person, someone with a lower human intellect, if each of them devotes equally to Elikus in this formula, in this contemplation, that the let's say call him the genius, this really smart one, is going to light up with divinity, Elikus, more than the ignorant or the less intelligent person, assuming they both make the same effort, because the fuel of the flame that is the human intellect. So a bigger human intellect, a smarter human intellect, a deeper one, is going to radiate more eloquence than a less intelligent one. Would you agree with that statement? Again, it's a hypothetical, but
I wouldn't agree for two reasons. First of all, when we say the word intellect, we need to break down what that means. Different people use their intellect in different ways. I'm not sure we're talking about based on IQ, based on how good a person does on tests, based on what? When you say in more intellect, what do you mean by that?
whatever the Rebbe means, Sekal Enoshi, whatever that means. I consider that to be like essentially IQ.
So I've never thought of it that way, nor do I think of it that way. Every person has their way of understanding God. And Shema Yisrael is very individualistic. They're never comparing two people. And everybody has to use their mind. Some people use a mind that's more, I guess, more philosophical. Some may do it more emotionally. Even in the mind, it's more intuitive. There's Chochmah, there's Bina, there's Das. So I need to hear, if someone individual came to me like a mashpia and say, here's how I'm contemplating and how can I do this better, I could advise on that. But a hypothetical question, to me, everybody has their way of understanding Yichud Tata, Yichud Elah. It's like asking, do some people understand Ayin Beis better than others? Of course there are people who understand it better, either because they've learned it many more times and have more experience, or because they have maybe more abstract or more refined or deeper minds, if you wish. But I don't know if that is relevant so much to the effect of Shema Yisrael on the Nefesh Habamis, because the person with intellect still has to contend with their animal soul, and the person with less intellect, as you're putting it, also has to contend. So the challenge is not just an intellectual one, it's also how it impacts them. So I would look at it more in practical terms. When you think of divine unity, you're thinking of the divine in your life. That when you eat a meal or you walk in the street, you're doing business, you're not just thinking about your own needs, which is what a Nefesh Habamis would do. You're thinking, how could this activity be directed toward godliness? And part of this contemplation, as we learned, is Yichud Tata, that everything in existence has a divine energy. Yichud Elah, so obviously it's different levels. A physicist who has a very deep understanding of quantum mechanics may have a certain particular way of understanding it as opposed to someone else. But then the question is, once you've contemplated on the divine, how is it going to affect you? That to me is the main part. Because it could be a philosophical idea and doesn't go anywhere. Shema Yisrael can remain a purely cerebral, theoretical concept. How does it turn to Vahafta? So there, I don't know if someone who's smarter is going to have a more powerful way of turning it into an emotional love of God than someone who's maybe not the same IQ. Because that takes another type of avodah. It's not just how well you understand it. You can understand these ideas and then go back and be a completely crass, indulgent hedonist. Another person may not understand it as well, but they become more refined by whatever they did understand. So to me, that's the whole picture.
Thank you. Yeah, that was beautiful. A very helpful application. Yeah.
Okay, so now, of course, the more a person can, let me put it this way. If you remember, I've said a number of times that according to Chassidus, intellect ultimately is not intellect. It's really the bittul of experiencing a reality greater than yourself. But the mind can take you there. Emotions can't always take you there because emotions are more subjective. The mind, you can imagine, you could dream, you could think of lifnei tzimtzum. Emotionally, it's very hard to go lifnei tzimtzum because it's not our consciousness. But intellectually, conceptually, yeah, you can imagine a reality where there's nothing but God. But then bring it into your life is going to be the challenge. So I'm not minimizing the power of understanding something well, and it could definitely contribute here. In other words, the oil of the animal soul's intelligence is being used to really understand the way that idea chassidus, let's say somebody really is able to take these ideas and turn it into a very practical application that we can find in psychology, in physics, in other schools of thought. There's no question that will make the idea far more palpable and real, which will then in turn be able to then affect the animal soul even more so. That would be like a good teacher can inspire your animal soul more than someone who's not such a good teacher. Or someone who understands the idea better can definitely engage the animal soul with a joke, with something the animal soul will respond to. So that would also be part of this equation.
Thank you.
Anyway,
Yes.
it's a combination of a bunch of factors.
I hear that. Yes. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And the tachlis is how much of a transformation is made, not how well the mind grasps the ideas.
Now,
That's
if you have
true.
the best of both worlds, then
Yeah.
by all means, someone who really can like make you feel godliness reverberating in your whole fiber of your being. I'm talking now first with the mind. And then in turn, it captivates your animal soul that it wants to like engage in this Ahavas Hashem. Absolutely. So you could have high levels of it. You can have lesser. And even the same person, frankly, one day you say Shema, you don't have that much time and concentration. Another time you have more time, like on a Shabbos or something, and you can spend hours on contemplating a Yichud Tata, Yichud Ilah, and you come away like literally walking on air, in a holy, a more refined state that has a real impact. So that I'm just trying to also take it away from just a theoretical to give us, real human, real life examples from us of how we can apply it.
Yes, very helpful. I think you gave the insight in how to apply it very practically, which is obviously the most important part of this. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the recording here. As I said, close to the bottom of page 6, my summary. Someone else wanted to ask something.
Yeah, is the Rebbeim here? Ayin Beis.
Welcome back, Eliezer.
Thank you. It's good to be back, but I miss Israel.
We all miss Israel.
Yeah, don't we ever? And it's quite an experience, and we just got to stand strong with our brothers there and here. It's it's the anti-Semitism here, and
Absolutely.
the physical one over there is very dramatic times right now, and we really got to stay strong, and we got to burn with the Hasidus and burn with Shema Yisrael and all these good things. It's very powerful.
You were going to say, go ahead. You wanted to ask something, Eliezer?
Yeah, I was wanted to say that the Mitteler Rebbe and the Rebbe Shab here, they're not. Are they indicating or that we could through Shema, even deepest contemplation in Shema and B'chol Levav B'chol Nafshecha for 2 hours a day? Say somebody's unbelievable. Most people do it for 2 minutes. Is going to light the flame of the blue, for the next 23 hours and 50 minutes of their daily life. I mean, to me, it seems like this could be a start, but we need a lot more to really keep that.
He's not listen, he's not laying out exact prescription of how long the medication is going to last. In Tanya chapter 12, he says right after davening, the Nefesh Habamis comes roaring back.
Roaring back, right.
Right. So the point here is a formula of getting to the Nefesh Habamis, affecting it as much as you can, and continue working on it. That's why we say Shema every day, and we say it several times a day, because that is not always enough. So I don't know if he's getting a guarantee. This is a formula that Hashem gave us and said, in this world, I'm giving you a blessing. I'm giving you Shema Yisrael. I'm giving you my bracha, my tefillah, my posuk and Torah, and it's going to give you power. If you use it properly, it will affect you. It's very hard to answer what you're saying because it's all dependent on the individual. I know people, God forbid, right after Shema, they go do things that are very antithetical to Shema.
Right.
So of course you'll say they didn't really say it properly. They just lip service. But I think someone who's serious about it, it will have an effect. The question is how much. That depends on the individual, the time, what you've done afterwards. That's why after the davening, some people learn, you want to make sure you maintain that. The Tzimtzum HaRishon is very powerful. It's always working. So even when you say Shema in the best possible way, there are going to be nisyonos, there are going to be challenges and tests and so on. So I think you just have to look at it. To me, it comes down to divine consciousness. The more you could, Rebbe said, do everything to bring Mashiach. Does that mean you're going to be 24/7 Einoid Movade? I don't think anyone could be like that. But as much as possible, bring Mashiach consciousness, divine consciousness into your life. And it does have an effect. You look, the fact is we learned Tanya. You've talked about Tanya Ayin Beis. It affects us. Some people it affects dramatically and maybe even forever. But that doesn't mean the work is over. There's still challenges. So I just look at it like I don't see it as a zero-sum game. Either you win the race or you don't. It's an ongoing journey, and you try to get better and better. And if you have a setback, you pick yourself up and you move forward and weiter. You keep going.
Right, because when Mashiach told the Mashiach told Baal Shem Tov when he met with him in the Heichel era of Rosh Hashanah, he didn't say, when are you coming? He didn't say when everybody can learn to say Shema with the deepest kavanas, as explained. He said, "Kashafutza manisecha putza." When Chassidus spreads out. Now you're going to answer.
But just for the record, if you look at the letter, it actually says also Liachid Yechudim right after that.
Right, and then Baal Shem Tov got upset, and it says or depressed. How's it going to be that people are going to be able to Yechudim and Elios like me? And then he gave him three names and three segulas that will, the Baal Shem Tov became calm and saw how that is easy to do. That it was easy to accomplish like the Elios and Yechudim like me. And I've always wondered what those three names were. And those three segulas.
Yeah. The thing is like this. If you don't mind, I need to run.
Okay.
So what this requires, I think, a little more discussion. Can you have your futsum and sechel without saying Shema, without davening, without learning? What does the Baal Shem Tov mean? That only if you spread Chassidus, that's enough? And what does spreading Chassidus mean? Maybe saying Shema is included in spreading Chassidus.
Right. Okay.
So
obviously,
we could talk more.
Okay.
Just I
Good.
want to give it the proper amount of time. It's not a quick.
Great.
So let me stop here. Page 6. We're doing as you had asked, Eliezer. We're actually going over my summary. So
right, and then we're going to apply it. That's how my